The radio crackled through the static at 3:47 hours, cutting through the mountain silence like a blade through bone. Overwatch, this is Reaper 6. We are compromised. Repeat, we are compromised. The transmission lasted exactly 4 seconds before dissolving into white noise, leaving only the howling wind across the Afghan peaks to fill the void. Captain Reyna Ghost, Vasquez pressed her headset tighter against her ear in the communications bunker at Bagram Air Base, her calloused fingers dancing across the frequency dial. 23 years old, 5'4", with eyes the color of storm clouds, she'd earned her call sign not for stealth, but for her ability to appear in impossible places when others needed her most. Tonight, 12 Navy SEALs were about to discover why. The mission had started simple enough: extract a high-value target from a Taliban compound nestled in the Hindu Kush Mountains. But simple missions had a way of becoming nightmares in Afghanistan's unforgiving terrain. Reaper 6, led by Commander Jake Bulldog Morrison, had fast-roped into the valley under cover of darkness. The extraction was supposed to take 45 minutes. That was 6 hours ago. Ghost stared at the topographical map spread across her workstation, tracing the contour lines with her index finger. The compound sat at 8,200 feet, surrounded by cliffs that dropped into nothing. No helicopter could reach them now, not with the weather front moving in and Taliban reinforcements closing the net. The SEALs were trapped on a ledge barely wide enough for a pickup truck, with nowhere to run and ammunition running low. "Ma'am," Sergeant First Class Torres approached her station, his voice carrying the weight of bad news. "Weather's reporting 0 visibility conditions moving in, winds gusting to 45 knots. No birds going up there tonight." Ghost nodded, her mind already calculating angles, drop zones, and the impossible physics of what she was about to propose. She'd flown C-130 Hercules aircraft for 3 years, but never anything like this. The other pilots called her crazy behind her back, said she took risks that would make angels weep. Tonight, those risks might be the only thing standing between 12 American warriors and body bags. The operations officer, Lieutenant Colonel Hayes, materialized beside her station like smoke. "Vasquez, tell me you're not thinking what I think you're thinking." Ghost looked up from the map, her storm-gray eyes reflecting the fluorescent lights above. "Sir, I'm thinking those boys need supplies, and I'm the only one crazy enough to deliver them." Hayes studied her face, seeing something there that made him pause. In the military, reputation preceded rank, and Ghost's reputation was written in the scorched earth of a dozen impossible missions. She'd landed a damaged Hercules on a highway in Iraq, dropped humanitarian aid into hurricane zones, and once flew medical supplies to a forward operating base while taking heavy fire. The radio squawked again, weaker this time. Any station, this is Reaper 6. We're running low on everything that matters." Ghost picked up the microphone, her voice steady as granite. "Reaper 6, this is Ghost. I'm coming to get you." The silence that followed seemed to stretch across continents. When Morrison's voice returned, it carried a note of desperate hope wrapped in professional skepticism. "Ghost, negative. Weather's too heavy. No bird can reach us." "Good thing I'm not flying a bird tonight, Reaper 6. I'm flying a miracle." Ghost stood from her station, 6 years of flight training and 3 combat deployments crystallizing into a single moment of absolute clarity. The C-130 Hercules sitting on the tarmac outside wasn't just an aircraft. It was a lifeline disguised as aluminum and determination. 4 Rolls-Royce turboprops, each one capable of keeping her airborne in conditions that would ground lesser machines. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes grabbed her arm as she reached for her flight gear. "Vasquez, this is suicide. The winds alone will tear you apart, and that's assuming you can even find them in 0 visibility." Ghost shrugged into her flight suit, the familiar weight of survival gear settling across her shoulders like armor. "Sir, with respect, those SEALs didn't volunteer to die on some godforsaken mountain ledge. Neither did I." She zipped up the suit and reached for her helmet. Besides, I've got something the weather doesn't. What's that? A promise to keep. The hangar doors groaned open, revealing the beast that would carry her into the storm. The C-130J Super Hercules gleamed under the floodlights, its four-bladed propellers motionless but somehow threatening. 112 feet of military engineering designed to haul cargo and personnel into the worst places on Earth. Tonight, it would earn every rivet. Flight Engineer Staff Sergeant Mike Wrench Kowalski approached, shaking his head. "Ghost, the old man's lost his mind letting you take this bird up. The weather's reporting winds that'll flip us like a pancake." "Then we better hold on tight, Wrench." Ghost performed her pre-flight inspection with the methodical precision of a surgeon checking hydraulics, control surfaces, and engine parameters. Every switch, every gauge, every warning light received her attention. In weather like this, there were no second chances. Loadmaster Technical Sergeant Rosa Freight Martinez finished securing the supply pallets in the cargo hold. Medical supplies, ammunition, water, and emergency rations. Everything the SEALs needed to survive until extraction became possible. The pallets were rigged for low-altitude parachute extraction system deployment, designed to be pulled from the aircraft by parachutes while maintaining forward momentum. "Ghost," Freight called from the cargo bay, "these supplies weigh 8,000 pounds. In this wind, they're going to scatter like confetti." "Not if I put them exactly where they need to be." Ghost settled into the pilot's seat, her hands finding the controls with the unconscious familiarity of a pianist touching keys. The instrument panel glowed green and amber, each light telling part of the story of flight. Co-pilot First Lieutenant Danny Calculator Kim climbed into the right seat, running through his checklist with mathematical precision. He'd earned his call sign by calculating fuel consumption, wind drift, and approach angles to the decimal point. Tonight, his numbers would have to be perfect. "Pre-flight complete," Calculator announced. "All systems green. Weather's reporting 30-knot crosswinds with gusts to 45. Ghost keyed her radio to tower frequency. "Bagram Tower, this is Reaper 77 requesting immediate departure clearance." The tower's response crackled through their headsets. "Reaper 77, weather is currently below minimums for all aircraft operations. Recommend you wait for conditions to improve." "Tower, Reaper 77 is declaring emergency authority. We have American personnel in immediate danger." A pause, then Reaper 77 cleared for takeoff. Godspeed. The C-130's engines wound up with a sound like controlled thunder, 4 turboprops biting into the thin mountain air. Ghost released the brakes and felt the aircraft surge forward, gathering momentum and purpose. At rotation speed, she pulled back on the yoke and felt the familiar sensation of Earth falling away beneath them. They climbed through layers of cloud that seemed solid as cotton, the aircraft shuddering in the turbulence like a thing alive. Lightning flickered in the distance, illuminating towering cumulonimbus clouds that rose like mountains in the sky. "Reaper 6, this is Ghost. We're airborne and inbound to your position. Estimate 15 minutes to target." Morrison's voice carried relief mixed with disbelief. "Ghost, I don't know how you're flying in this soup, but we're damn glad you are. We can hear the bad guys moving in the rocks below us." The C-130 bucked and rolled as Ghost fought to maintain heading, the autopilot long since disconnected in favor of human hands and instinct. Through the cockpit windows, nothing existed except gray nothingness punctuated by occasional flashes of lightning. Calculator's voice cut through the turbulence. "GPS shows target bearing 270 degrees, range 12 miles, but Ghost, the terrain clearance is less than 500 feet. We're going to be threading the needle between mountain peaks." "I can thread needles, Calculator. It's what they pay me for." The forward-looking infrared display showed ghostly images of the mountain peaks sliding past their wings, close enough to touch. Ghost flew by instruments and intuition, her hands constantly adjusting throttles and control surfaces to keep them in the narrow corridor of survivable airspace. There, calculator pointed at his screen. Thermal signature at 11 o'clock, that's them. Through the FLIR display, Ghost could see the heat signatures of 12 men huddled on a ledge no bigger than a basketball court. Taliban fighters moved through the rocks below like deadly ants, their weapons occasionally flashing in the infrared spectrum. The drop zone was impossibly small, a shelf of rock surrounded by 1,000-foot drops on 3 sides. In clear weather, it would be challenging. In zero visibility with hurricane-force winds, it was insane. Ghost keyed her intercom. "Freight, how long do you need for LAPES deployment?" 30 seconds of straight and level flight. "Roger, calculator. I need precise heading and airspeed for the drop. Factor in wind drift and the fact that we'll be flying blind." Calculator's fingers flew across his computer, calculating vectors and probabilities. Heading 268 degrees, airspeed 130 knots. But Ghost, the margin for error is basically zero. If we're off by 50 feet in any direction, we won't be. Ghost banked the aircraft into the approach, feeling the mountains reaching up toward them like grasping fingers. The altimeter unwound steadily as they descended into the Valley of Shadows. The radio crackled with Morrison's voice. "Ghost, we can hear your engines, but we can't see anything. The weather's a complete whiteout up here." "Stay exactly where you are, Reaper 6. I'm coming in from the west. When I tell you to mark your position, I need the brightest flare you have." Ghost lined up on her approach heading, the aircraft fighting her every input as crosswinds tried to slam them into the mountainside. Through the cockpit windscreen, she could see nothing but swirling gray death. Everything depended on instruments, calculations, and the kind of flying that existed somewhere beyond training and technique. "Reaper 6, mark your position now." A brilliant red flare burst through the clouds below them, painting the mountainside in hellish light for exactly 3 seconds before disappearing into the storm. "I got them," Ghost announced over intercom. "Freight, stand by for LAPES drop, 30 seconds and counting." The C-130 bucked violently as Ghost fought to hold heading and airspeed. The cargo door was already open, wind howling through the fuselage like banshees. In the back, Freight prepared to deploy 8,000 pounds of survival into the teeth of nature's fury. 20 seconds, calculator announced. Ghost felt the aircraft sliding sideways in the crosswind, her rudder pedals pressed nearly to the stops. The mountain peaks showed on radar as solid walls of death, with barely 100 feet of clearance on either side. 10 seconds, 5, 4, 3, 2, mark. "Supplies away," Freight shouted. The C-130 lurched upward as 8,000 pounds of cargo extracted from the back, dragged out by parachutes and momentum. Ghost immediately began a climbing turn to clear the mountain peaks, not knowing if the drop had been successful. "Reaper 6, this is Ghost. Supplies deployed, report status." Silence stretched across the radio waves, filled only by static and the sound of 4 engines clawing for altitude. Ghost held her breath, waiting for confirmation that the impossible had become possible. Then Morrison's voice cut through the white noise, carrying a tone she'd never heard from the gruff SEAL commander. "Ghost, this is Reaper 6. Supplies on target. I don't know how you did it, but you just saved 12 American lives." The flight back to Bagram passed in relative silence, the storm gradually releasing its grip on their aircraft as they descended through the cloud layers. Ghost's hands shook slightly on the controls, not from fear, but from the adrenaline crash that always followed missions like this. Calculator broke the quiet. "Ghost, I ran the numbers on that drop. The probability of success was less than 15%. In any flight training manual, that would be classified as impossible." "Good thing I don't read training manuals." Ghost's voice carried exhaustion mixed with satisfaction. "I just fly the airplane." As they touched down at Bagram, Ghost could see ground crews and officers waiting on the tarmac. News traveled fast in military circles, especially when someone accomplished something that shouldn't have been possible. By morning, every pilot on base would know that Ghost Vasquez had flown supplies to a cliffside ledge in zero visibility. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes approached as Ghost completed her post-flight inspection. "Vasquez, I just got off the radio with SOCOM. They want a detailed briefing on how you pulled that off." Ghost removed her helmet, her hair damp with sweat and her storm gray eyes reflecting the runway lights. "Sir, I just flew the airplane where it needed to go. Nobody else could have made that drop." "Maybe, but those SEALs needed supplies and we had supplies to give them. Sometimes the math works out." Hayes studied her face in the dim light, seeing something there that went beyond technical skill or raw courage. "You know, Vasquez, when you first arrived here, some people thought you were just another hotshot pilot looking for glory." Ghost shouldered her flight bag and began walking toward the operations building. "What do they think now, sir?" "Now they think you're the kind of pilot who makes the impossible look routine." Hayes fell into step beside her. "The SEALs will be extracted at first light when the weather clears. Morrison specifically requested that you be the one to brief his replacement team on mountain flying techniques." The operations building hummed with quiet activity as Ghost completed her mission paperwork. Other pilots nodded respectfully as she passed, their attitudes subtly different from before. In military aviation, reputation was earned in moments like these, when weather and terrain and enemy fire converged to create situations where only skill and determination could prevail. Ghost poured herself coffee from the perpetually brewing pot and sat down at her desk to write the after-action report. The words came slowly, each sentence attempting to capture the complexity of flying, blind through mountain valleys in hurricane-force winds. How did you explain intuition on a government form? How did you quantify the feeling of knowing exactly where your aircraft was in three-dimensional space, even when you couldn't see beyond the windscreen? The radio room received Morrison's final transmission at 6:30 hours, as the first light of dawn began painting the Hindu Kush Mountains in shades of gold and amber. "Bagram Base, this is Reaper 6. We are secure and awaiting extraction. Tell Ghost she flies like an angel with a death wish." Flight Operations Officer Major Sandra Compass Rivera found Ghost still at her desk, staring at the half-completed report. Compass had flown helicopters in Iraq before transitioning to fixed-wing operations, and her respect for fellow pilots was hard-earned. "Heard you had an interesting night," Compass said, setting down 2 cups of coffee. "Just another supply run." Ghost accepted the coffee gratefully, inhaling the familiar aroma that had fueled military operations since time immemorial. "Bull, I've been flying for 15 years, and I've never heard of anyone making a LAPES drop in zero visibility onto a target the size of a parking space." Compass sat down across from Ghost's desk. "The weather folks are saying conditions last night were beyond the operational limits of any aircraft." Ghost shrugged, her fingers wrapped around the warm coffee cup. "Aircraft don't have limits, pilots do. Last night I just refused to accept mine." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Chief Master Sergeant Top Williams, the senior enlisted advisor for the entire wing. Top had been flying military aircraft since before Ghost was born, and his opinion carried weight that transcended rank structure. "Captain Vasquez," Top's voice carried the authority of 3 decades in the Air Force. "I've been in this business long enough to know the difference between skill and luck. What you did last night was pure skill." Ghost stood respectfully. "Chief, those SEALs. Those SEALs are alive because you flew that bird where nobody else could fly it." Top's weathered face cracked into something resembling a smile. "I've put you in for an air medal. The citation's going to read for heroism while participating in aerial flight. But between you and me, it should read for doing the impossible when nobody else would try. As the morning progressed, word of the midnight supply drop spread through the base like wildfire. Pilots, crew chiefs, loadmasters, and support personnel all found reasons to walk past Ghost's workstation. Some nodded respectfully, others offered quiet words of congratulation, but all of them looked at her differently now. By 1,000 hours, the weather had cleared enough for helicopter extraction of the SEAL team. Ghost watched from the tower as two Black Hawks lifted off, heading toward the mountains that had seemed so menacing in the darkness. In daylight, the peaks looked almost benign, their snow-covered summits gleaming in the morning sun. "Reaper 6 is airborne," the radio announced. "Extraction successful, all personnel accounted for." Ghost felt a weight lift from her shoulders that she hadn't realized was there. Mission complete. 12 American warriors heading home. The mathematics of war measured in lives saved rather than ordnance delivered. Commander Morrison found her in the officers' club that evening, still wearing his combat gear and carrying the 1,000-yard stare that followed difficult missions. He was a big man, built like the linebacker he'd been in college, with hands that looked capable of crushing steel and eyes that had seen too much war. "Captain," Morrison's voice carried the gravel of exhaustion mixed with gratitude. "I owe you a drink. Hell, I owe you 12 drinks." Ghost looked up from her own beer, nodding the way Morrison's team had arranged themselves around the table, not quite relaxed, but no longer coiled for combat. "Just doing my job, Commander." "No," Morrison sat down heavily across from her. "Your job was to fly cargo planes in good weather to established landing zones. What you did last night was something else entirely." One of the SEALs, a young petty officer with intelligent eyes, leaned forward. "Ma'am, when we heard those engines coming through the storm, half of us thought we were hallucinating. The other half thought it was the Taliban dropping mortars on us." Ghost smiled slightly. "Were you disappointed when it was just supplies?" "Hell no," Morrison laughed, the sound carrying genuine humor for the first time. "Those supplies included ammunition, medical gear, and the best damn military meals ready to eat the taxpayers' money can buy. We went from counting bullets to having enough firepower to hold that ridge until the second coming." The conversation continued late into the evening, with Morrison and his team recounting the mission from their perspective. The compound had been a dry hole, no high-value target, just empty rooms and Taliban propaganda. But intelligence had been wrong before and would be wrong again. What mattered was getting everyone home. "The thing is," Morrison said, his voice dropping to a more serious tone, "when we called for help, every other pilot on this base said it was impossible. Weather too bad, target too small, risk too high. You were the only one who said, 'I'm coming to get you.'" Ghost stared into her beer, considering her words carefully. "Commander, I've been flying for 6 years. In that time, I've learned that impossible is just another word for hasn't been done yet." The following morning brought new missions, new challenges, and the endless cycle of operations that defined life at a forward operating base. But something had shifted in the base's culture, a subtle change in how people looked at Ghost and what they expected from themselves. Captain Jeff Slider Morrison, no relation to the SEAL commander, approached Ghost during the morning briefing. Slider was known for his by-the-book flying and his skepticism toward anyone who took unnecessary risks. "Ghost, I owe you an apology," Slider said quietly. "I've been saying you fly too aggressively, that you take risks that endanger your crew." Ghost raised an eyebrow, "And now?" "Now I realize there's a difference between reckless and fearless. What you did last night was fearless." Slider paused, choosing his words carefully. "I'd be honored to fly as your wingman anytime." The conversation was overheard by several other pilots, and Ghost noticed the subtle shift in their body language. Respect had to be earned in military aviation, and she'd paid for hers with a midnight flight through impossible weather to an impossible target. Major Tom Viper Jackson, the squadron's operations officer, called Ghost into his office after the briefing. Viper was a F-16 pilot who transferred to cargo operations, bringing with him the fighter pilot's combination of supreme confidence and barely controlled aggression. "Vasquez, I just got off the phone with Wing Headquarters," Viper said, leaning back in his chair. "They want to know if you'd be interested in test pilot school." Ghost felt her pulse quicken. Test pilot school was the pinnacle of military aviation, a place where the best pilots pushed the boundaries of what aircraft could do. "Sir, I'm honored, but I'm happy flying cargo." "Are you? Because what you did last night wasn't cargo flying. That was test pilot stuff, pushing an aircraft beyond its known limits to accomplish something that had never been done before." Ghost considered this, thinking about the moment when she'd committed to the approach despite zero visibility and hurricane-force winds. "Sir, I just flew the airplane where it needed to go." "Exactly. That's what test pilots do. They fly airplanes where they've never been before, so other pilots know it can be done." The office fell quiet except for the distant sound of aircraft engines and the ever-present hum of air conditioning. Ghost stared out the window at the flight line, watching crews prepare aircraft for the day's missions. "I need to think about it, sir." "Take your time. But remember, Captain, what you accomplished last night will be remembered long after the war is over. The question is whether you want to do it again." That afternoon brought an unexpected visitor to the base. Brigadier General Patricia Hammer Stone arrived via C-17, making one of her periodic visits to forward operating bases. Hammer had been the first woman to command a combat wing, and her reputation for turning mediocre units into exceptional ones was legendary throughout the Air Force. Ghost was summoned to the base commander's office, where she found herself standing at attention before two general officers and the base commander. The room felt smaller with so much rank concentrated in one place. "Captain Vasquez," General Stone's voice carried the authority of someone who'd commanded in combat for 2 decades. "I've read the after-action report from last night's mission. Walk me through your decision-making process." Ghost straightened her shoulders and began recounting the mission, from the initial distress call to the final confirmation of successful supply delivery. She kept her language precise and professional, focusing on facts rather than feelings. When she finished, General Stone studied her with intelligent eyes that seemed to see everything. "Captain, in your assessment, what was the probability of mission success when you made the decision to launch?" "Ma'am, I didn't calculate probabilities. 12 Americans needed help, and I had the means to provide it." "But surely you understood the risks, to yourself, your crew, and your aircraft." Ghost met the general's gaze directly. "Ma'am, the only unacceptable risk was leaving those SEALs on that mountain." General Stone exchanged glances with the base commander before continuing. "Captain, I've been flying military aircraft for 25 years. I've seen pilots accomplish remarkable things, but what you did last night falls into a category I'd call legendary." The word hung in the air like smoke. Legendary. Ghost had never thought of herself in those terms. She was just a pilot who flew wherever she was needed. "Ma'am, I was just doing my job." "No, Captain. Your job was to fly in safe conditions to established landing zones. What you did was redefine what's possible." General Stone stood from behind the desk. "I'm recommending you for immediate promotion to major and assignment to the 418th Flight Test Squadron at Edwards Air Force Base." Ghost felt the room tilt slightly. Edwards was where Chuck Yeager had broken the sound barrier, where test pilots pushed the envelope of what aircraft could do. It was the pinnacle of military aviation. "Ma'am, I'm honored, but nothing major." General Stone smiled slightly. "The Air Force needs pilots who can do the impossible when it matters most. Last night, you proved you're that pilot." The change of command ceremony took place 3 weeks later, with Ghost's promotion to Major and her reassignment orders to Edwards Air Force Base. The entire base turned out for the ceremony, an unusual show of respect for a cargo pilot who'd spent less than a year at Bagram. Commander Morrison and his SEAL team attended the ceremony, having specifically requested permission to stay at Bagram for the event. As Ghost stood at attention while the orders were read, she could see them in the formation, 12 men who were alive because she'd refused to accept the impossible. After the ceremony, Morrison approached her with something wrapped in a black cloth. "Major, the team wanted you to have this." Ghost unwrapped the cloth to reveal a Navy SEAL trident pin, the gold eagle clutching anchor, pistol, and trident that symbolized the brotherhood of America's most elite warriors. Below it was a small brass plate engraved with simple words: "To Ghost, Honorary SEAL, fair winds and following seas." "Commander, I can't accept this. I'm not." "You are." Morrison's voice carried absolute certainty. "You proved it when you flew through hell to bring us what we needed to survive. In our book, that makes you family." Ghost pinned the trident to her dress uniform, feeling its weight against her chest. Later, she would frame it and hang it in her office at Edwards, but for now, it served as a reminder that heroism came in many forms. The flight to Edwards Air Force Base took Ghost over the same mountain ranges where she'd made her legendary supply drop, but from 35,000 feet in a commercial airliner, they looked different, smaller, less threatening. Distance and altitude had a way of changing perspective. At Edwards, Ghost found herself surrounded by the best pilots in the world, men and women who pushed experimental aircraft to their limits and beyond. The Mojave Desert stretched endlessly in all directions, providing the perfect environment for testing aircraft that might one day change the world. Her first assignment was flying the C-130J Hercules II, testing new avionics and flight control systems that would eventually equip every cargo aircraft in the Air Force inventory. The work was methodical and precise, requiring the kind of attention to detail that separated test pilots from operational pilots. But word of her Afghan mission had preceded her to Edwards. Other test pilots had heard the story, embellished through multiple tellings but maintaining its essential truth. A cargo pilot had accomplished something that shouldn't have been possible. "So you're the Ghost," said Colonel Marcus Iceman Thompson, the squadron commander. Iceman had been a fighter pilot before transitioning to test flying, and his office walls were covered with photographs of exotic aircraft that existed nowhere else on Earth. "Yes, sir. I read the mission report. Zero visibility, hurricane-force winds, target the size of a postage stamp. Either you're the luckiest pilot alive, or you've got skills we need to understand better." Ghost settled into the chair across from Iceman's desk. "Sir, I just flew the airplane where it needed to go." "That's what everyone says you said in Afghanistan. But here's the thing, Ghost. Test pilots don't just fly airplanes where they need to go. We fly them where they've never been before so we can map the territory for everyone else." The conversation was interrupted by the roar of jet engines as an experimental aircraft took off from the runway outside. Through the office windows, Ghost could see the distinctive shape of an aircraft she didn't recognize, delta-winged and sleek, with exhaust that seemed to bend light around it. "What is that?" she asked. Iceman smiled. "That's classified, but if you stick around long enough you might get to fly it." Ghost's training at Edwards began with ground school, learning the theoretical foundations of test flying. She studied aerodynamics, flight test methodology, and the mathematical principles that governed how aircraft behaved at the edges of their performance envelopes. But the real education came in the air, flying with instructors who'd spent decades pushing aircraft beyond their design limits. Ghost's natural flying ability, combined with her experience in impossible conditions, made her a quick study. "She's got hands," announced Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Phoenix, Martinez after Ghost's first evaluation flight. Phoenix was the senior instructor pilot, a former F-22 pilot who transitioned to test flying after a close encounter with a surface-to-air missile over Syria. Hands in test pilot terminology meant natural flying ability, the kind of instinctive feel for aircraft that couldn't be taught. Combined with Ghost's proven ability to operate in extreme conditions, it made her a valuable addition to the program. 6 months into her assignment at Edwards, Ghost received a call that would change everything. The voice on the secure phone belonged to General Stone, now commanding all Air Force flight test operations. "Major, how familiar are you with the C-130J Block 8.1 upgrade program?" "Ma'am, I've read the technical specifications. Enhanced avionics, improved weather radar, upgraded flight controls. What I'm about to tell you is classified at the highest levels. The Block 8.1 upgrade includes experimental weather penetration systems designed to allow cargo operations in conditions that would ground conventional aircraft." Ghost felt her pulse quicken. "Ma'am, you're talking about flying in weather that's currently considered impossible." "Exactly. We need a test pilot who's already proven she can do the impossible. Your mission in Afghanistan demonstrated exactly the kind of flying this system is designed to enable." The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with General Stone outlining a test program that would push the boundaries of what cargo aircraft could accomplish. The goal was to create capabilities that would allow supply missions to remote areas regardless of weather conditions. "Major, I'll be honest with you. This program is dangerous. We're asking you to fly experimental aircraft into weather conditions that have never been attempted before. Some of the test points will be at the very edge of what's survivable." Ghost stared out her office window at the Mojave Desert, thinking about 12 SEALs on a mountain ledge and the impossible supply drop that had changed everything. "Ma'am, when do we start?" The experimental C-130J arrived at Edwards on a Tuesday morning in November, carried in pieces aboard 3 different cargo aircraft. Ghost watched as technicians assembled what looked like a standard Hercules, but bristled with antennas, sensors, and equipment she didn't recognize. "It's beautiful," said Captain Rick Data Kowalski, the flight test engineer assigned to the program. Data had earned his call sign by his ability to extract meaningful information from the endless stream of numbers generated by test flights. "It's different," Ghost corrected, studying the aircraft's specifications. "Enhanced weather radar, experimental flight controls, redundant navigation systems. This bird is designed to fly in conditions that would kill conventional aircraft." The first test flight was scheduled for the following week, pending completion of ground testing and system verification. Ghost spent her days in the simulator, learning the aircraft's new systems and practicing emergency procedures that hopefully would never be needed. But the real test would come when they encountered actual weather, the kind of violent, chaotic atmospheric conditions that turned flying from a science into an art form. Ghost had proven once that she could navigate impossible weather. Now she would have to do it again, with experimental equipment and the eyes of the Air Force's senior leadership watching every move. The night before the first test flight, Ghost stood on the flight line looking up at the experimental C-130J in the desert darkness. With only the glow of security lights for illumination, the aircraft looked like something from the future, a machine designed to operate in conditions that would challenge the laws of physics. Tomorrow, she would take it into the sky and begin pushing the boundaries of what was possible. It was what test pilots did. They flew into the unknown so others could follow. Ghost had been preparing for this moment her entire career, even when she didn't know it. The mountains of Afghanistan had taught her that impossible was just another word for not yet accomplished. Now, in the controlled environment of Edwards Air Force Base, she would apply those lessons to advancing the art and science of flight itself. As she walked back toward the operations building, Ghost felt the weight of the seal trident pinned inside her flight suit. 12 men were alive because she'd refused to accept limitations. Tomorrow, she would continue that tradition, not for any individual lives hanging in the balance, but for the principle that when human skill met technological capability, remarkable things became possible. The stars above the Mojave Desert seemed to watch approvingly as Ghost prepared for the next chapter in a career that had already redefined what it meant to be a military pilot. In the morning, she would climb into the cockpit of an experimental aircraft and push the boundaries of flight itself. But tonight, she was content to be exactly what she'd always been, a pilot who flew wherever she was needed, regardless of what others considered possible. The sky had no limits for those brave enough to test them.